So now you have an artboard and you're ready to start working. Something very important whenever you're working in any of these programs, Illustrator or Photoshop or InDesign or what have you, is that you should always be saving your work. And you can see right here, this little star that means this is not saved. That means if something happens to my computer, this is gone. And now you might say, oh, but I haven't done anything yet. Well, the first step you should always do is once you create your document, you should save. So we go File, Save, or you can do Save As, but since we've never saved this one, we could just say File, Save. All right, and want you to save this as apples. We are going to be creating our denotative image making. It is what it is, a literal depiction of apples. So save. And right here, you don't really need to worry about this. Say OK. So now you'll notice that it'll change to the name that you've called it. .ai means it's an Illustrator file, and you're ready to start working. Now, the first thing we're going to work on is using all of the shapes. And you can see right here, this is our shapes. And remember, if you hold down right by the corner, you get all the different options, and we can even pop them out right here. And this allows us to change our view. So we have a lot of different shape options. The ones that I want you to be playing with are just these 5. Don't worry about the flare one right here. So the first one is just, creating a normal box. The second one is creating a box with squared corners. The third one is a circle. So remember, our modifier key allows us to create perfect shapes like a circle. And here is our polygon tool. If we click, we can change the number of sides. So say I want a triangle. If I go 3, then that will give me a 3-sided triangle. So these are our shapes. Now, just like in Photoshop, if when we're creating something or we want to change something, in terms of the colors and the strokes, if we select an object, you can see here, this is the fill and this is the stroke, right? So this right here, when we have this selected, and whenever anything's selected, you'll notice that you can now see all the bounding box and all the control points. You can change the color of the fill, and you can switcheroo the fill and the stroke. All right, so we're not worrying about fill and stroke or anything like that. You can play around with creating objects and changing the fill and changing the stroke. All right, so your first step is, look, Ma, I can make shapes. So make shapes, make a lot of different shapes. So that's your first step. So right now, stop and create your shapes. All right, so now that you've created your shapes, you can say, oh, this little star right here, that means my object isn't saved. So always be Command S to be saving your work as you're working. Remember, you want to get into the habit of saving your work so that if anything happens, you haven't lost everything. All right, so we're going to be creating apples. So when we're thinking about apples and we're thinking about denotative image making, it is what it is, a little depiction of an apple. We can start by thinking about maybe an apple with shapes would be kind of like circle-y, but not completely circle. So if we hold down Shift, it's a complete circle, and we want it to be a little bit more rounded like that, and we want it to be red because that means it's an apple. And then this right here is the little stem, and that is a bit more brown, right? And I want to also have a leaf, and that's going to be like this. And now this is very inexact, right? Basically, you're just kind of creating something that kind of looks like an apple, but maybe not really. So you're like, wait a second, I've created these objects, but now I want to manipulate them. So the first thing you should know is that when you select an object, or if you drag like this and you select multiple objects, you now have all these different control points that allow you to manipulate your object. So whatever you select, whether it's one object or multiple objects, all right, you're going to see this bounding box that contains all the artwork that you're manipulating. The 4 corners, these are the control points. And when you take your mouse and you bring it out, you can see it changes to allow you to manipulate your work. When it becomes the 2 opposing arrows, that means that allows you to change the size. And if you hold down Shift, just like in Photoshop, this allows you to change your size proportionally. The arrow then changes to a sort of rotational tool, and this allows you to rotate your object. Holding down Shift allows you to rotate it at specific 90-degree or 45-degree increments. And then the Shift allows you to change this proportionally. And again, you can just select one of these and change it, or you could select more than one. And by dragging like so, this allows you to select multiple objects. Also, if you click on one and then you hold Shift and you click another one, you click another one. Very importantly are these selection tools, direct selection and selection tool. Do not worry about the direct selection tool right now. The selection tool is what you want to be worrying about. This allows you to select your objects. So if you're on any other tool, and you'll notice there's a shortcut for a lot of these tools. So if I'm on my shape tool and I'm making stuff and I want to go back to the selection tool, if I just hit V, now I'm in the selection tool and I can very easily switch back and forth. So knowing some of these shortcuts is very handy. So now your step is to try to kind of create an apple using the shapes. All right, and then your job is to manipulate it a little bit, like moving around and resizing it. So that's your next step. Okay, so now do that now. All right, good job. The next thing I want you to do is take what you just did, select all of it. All right, and very importantly, this is a tool that I use all the time, and it's not really a tool, it's just using the Alt on a Mac, modifier tool, and you'll see now that we have these two arrows, the black and white. So now that I hold it down, there's these two arrows. When I click and drag, this allows me to duplicate whatever I am working on. It is very handy. I use it all the time. So I want you to duplicate what you just worked on because we want to manipulate it. And as always, I am saving my work. So I've created one apple out of shapes, and now I'm going to be creating another apple out of shapes, and I want to manipulate it. The next step I want you to do is just have some fun playing around with adding other shapes, right? And then we're going to be using the Shape Builder tool. So the Shape Builder tool is right here, and this is a handy thing, right? This allows you to merge different objects, but they have to be selected. So if I merely use the Shape Builder tool, it doesn't do anything on its own. But if I select multiple objects, again, I'm holding down Shift, and I use the Shape Builder tool, you see how it kind of lights up? This allows me, when I click and drag, to merge these shapes together, and it's handy. So now I want you to do is play around with your second apple and sort of distort it around and build your shapes together. Okay, so now that you've done that, you should always be saving your work. And I want to go over one more thing before we move on. So you look over here, layers. So it's slightly different than Photoshop. In Photoshop, there are layers and groups. In Illustrator, there's layers and sublayers. So right now, everything is on this one core layer. You can consider it kind of like a folder with all these sublayers, right? And I can see everything here. And if I click on it right here, it highlights that one. I can directly select that specific object. But when you're working on something that's a little more advanced, you want to make sure that you're creating new layers for your work. So this one, I can call this Shape Apple. Yeah. And now I can hide it, I can view it, and I can lock it. So this is really importantly. So now I want you to make sure you stop and you create a Shape Apple layer right here and save your work. And now we're going to move on.